What if the Crusades were never just about faith? What if behind the crosses, the sermons, and the sacred vows, there was a business model? For centuries, we've been told a simple story. Medieval Europe rose up in religious fury, marched east to reclaim Holy Land, and spilled blood in the name of God. A clash of civilizations. A tragic collision of belief. But that explanation leaves something unanswered. Why did the Crusades last nearly 200 years? Why did they grow more organized, more expansive, and more bureaucratic over time? And most unsettling of all, why did so many powerful European institutions grow richer the longer the wars continued? Wars usually drain economies. They bankrupt kingdoms. They destroy trade. Yet after the Crusades, Europe emerged more commercialized, more financially sophisticated, and more militarized than ever before. Banks expanded, shipping networks exploded, permanent taxation became normal, and warfare transformed from an emergency into an industry. So here's the mystery we're unraveling today. How did a religious war help build Europe's first true war economy, one that would echo forward into modern military-industrial systems? To answer that, we need to go back to a Europe that was poor, fractured, and desperate, and to a promise that turned salvation into profit. Before the Crusades, Europe was not the powerhouse we imagine today. In the late 11th century, Western Europe was economically fragile. Most people lived off subsistence farming. Coinage was scarce. Trade was local. Kings ruled weak territories, constantly challenged by rival nobles. Violence was common but disorganized. Knights fought private wars. Lords raided each other's lands. Mercenaries drifted from conflict to conflict. This constant internal violence was a problem. For the church, it undermined spiritual authority. For kings, it weakened political control. For merchants, it made trade dangerous and unreliable. Europe had fighters but no productive outlet for them. At the same time, something else was happening. To the east, the Byzantine Empire, wealthy, urbanized, and deeply connected to global trade, was under pressure from Seljuk Turks. Trade routes were threatened. Pilgrims faced danger. And crucially, access to eastern markets, spices, silver was unstable. When Byzantine Emperor Alexios I appealed to the West for help, he likely expected a small mercenary force. What he got instead was something far bigger. In 1095, Pope Urban II stood before a crowd at the Council of Clermont and delivered a message that would change Europe forever. God wills it. But beneath the religious core was something far more practical, a solution to Europe's economic and political chaos. The First Crusade did something revolutionary. It didn't just call men to fight. It organized violence at a continental scale. For the first time, Europe coordinated armies across kingdoms, languages, and feudal loyalties, all under a single ideological banner. But wars require resources, weapons, armor, horses, ships, food, pay, and Europe didn't have cash lying around. So how did they finance it? This is where the war economy quietly begins. To fund their journey, crusaders sold land, mortgaged estates, borrowed from merchants, and pledged future income. Churches collected donations. Nobles imposed new levies. Entire villages were taxed to support a single knight. This wasn't temporary. These financial tools, war loans, asset liquidation, collective taxation, would become permanent features of European economies. And then came the logistics. Moving tens of thousands of men across continents required supply chains Europe had never built before. Shipbuilders in Venice and Genoa expanded fleets. Grain traders secured contracts. Blacksmiths mass-produced weapons. For merchants, war became opportunity. For cities, war became growth. And for the church, war became revenue. The Crusades didn't just mobilize armies, they mobilized capital. As the Crusades continued, something changed. They stopped being spontaneous. Religious response and became planned, repeatable campaigns. This is when institutions stepped in. Italian merchant republics like Venice, Genoa, and Pisa mastered crusade logistics. They transported troops, supplied fleets, and in return gained trade privileges, ports, and monopolies in captured territories. Venice didn't just fight in crusades. Venice invested in them. Crusader states in the Levant became commercial hubs, linking Europe to Asian markets. Spices flowed west. Silver flowed east. Middlemen grew rich. Meanwhile, new military orders emerged. The Knights Templar weren't just warriors, they were bankers. They accepted deposit, issued letters of credit, transferred money across borders. Pilgrims could deposit funds in Paris and withdraw them in Jerusalem. This was revolutionary. War created the need for secure, transnational finance, and the Crusades delivered it. Kings noticed. So did popes. Crusades were no longer just about Jerusalem. They were launched against heretics in Europe, political enemies, and even rival Christian cities. The language of holy war justified continuous military campaigns, and every campaign meant taxes. For the first time, Europeans experienced regular, centralized war taxation. Temporary levies became permanent systems. Violence became predictable. Predictability made profit possible. But systems built on war always expand until they expose themselves. By the Fourth Crusade, the mask slipped. Instead of marching to the Holy Land, Crusaders deeply in debt to Venetian financier Zetek Constantinople, one of the richest Christian cities in the world. It was looted, burned, stripped of wealth. Holy war had become openly transactional. Faith no longer directed the sword, debt did. The destruction of Constantinople shocked Christendom, but it also proved something dangerous. War could be redirected for profit. Religious justification was flexible. Targets were negotiable. As long as the system paid. This moment revealed the Crusades' true legacy, not just conquest, but a self-sustaining war economy. By the late 13th century, the Crusades were failing. One by one, the Crusader states and the Levant collapsed. Acre fell in 1291. Jerusalem was long lost. The dream of permanent Christian control over the Holy Land faded into memory. But something crucial did not disappear. The wars ended. The war economy remained. This is the paradox at the heart of the Crusades' legacy. Europe had built financial systems, military institutions, and political habits that depended on continuous conflict. Ending the Crusades did not dismantle these systems. It left them searching for new purposes. Kings had learned something dangerous. War could be financed before it was fought. Permanent taxation, once justified as an emergency measure, became normalized. Bureaucracies that collected crusade taxes didn't dissolve. They were repurposed. Naval fleets built for holy war were redirected toward trade domination and imperial expansion. Even the church struggled to shut the machine down. Popes continued calling crusades long after the Holy Land was lost against Muslims in Iberia, pagans in the Baltic, heretics in France, and political rivals in Italy. Their justification shifted, but the economic structure stayed intact. War had become too useful to abandon, and Europe was now organized to wage it efficiently. Several attempts were made to rein in the excesses of crusading warfare. None succeeded. After the sack of Constantinople, church leaders tried to reassert moral authority. Councils condemned the misuse of crusading vows for personal gain, but condemnation couldn't compete with profit. Merchants, nobles, and rulers had already tasted what organized warfare could produce: land, trade routes, political leverage, and cash. Moral appeals lacked enforcement mechanisms, and enforcement cost money, which led back to war. The most famous example is the destruction of the Knights Templar in the early 14th century. Officially, they were accused of heresy. Unofficially, they were too powerful, too wealthy, and too independent. European kings, especially Francis Philip IV, were deeply in debt to them. Eliminating the Templars, he erased those debts and seized their assets. But this didn't end military banking. It simply transferred power to royal treasuries and emerging private financiers. The system adapted. The banker-warrior model lived on just under new management. Periods of peace followed the Crusades. But peace created its own crisis. Armies needed employment. Shipyards needed contracts. Tax systems needed justification. Without war, revenue collapsed. So conflicts were found. Border disputes, dynastic claims, religious differences, trade disagreements. Europe didn't become more violent by accident. It became violent by design. The Crusades taught Europe several enduring lessons. 1. War could unify fragmented societies. 2. Violence could be financed through future promises. 3. Ideology could mask economic motives. These lessons didn't vanish, they evolved. As the medieval period gave way to early modern Europe, crusading logic migrated west and south. Colonial expansion followed similar patterns: religious justification, commercial monopolies, military enforcement, financial backers guaranteed returns. The language changed. The structure didn't. Empires replaced crusader states. Chartered companies replaced military orders. Kings replaced popes. But war remained an economic engine. Now here's where the story becomes uncomfortable, because the system born during the Crusades looks disturbingly familiar. Modern war economies follow the same blueprint: centralized funding, private contractors, ideological justification, long-term profit structures. Today, defense spending runs into trillions of dollars globally each year. Entire industries exist solely to prepare for, wage, and sustain conflict. Like medieval Europe, modern states borrow to fight wars, tax populations for security, normalize permanent military readiness. And just like the Crusades, wars rarely end cleanly. They wind down, they rebrand, they shift theaters, but the economic system behind them stays alive. The Crusades didn't invent war, they invented organized, repeatable, profit-compatible war. That's the real legacy. Once a society builds infrastructure for war, dismantling it becomes almost impossible. Why? Because too many interests depend on it. In medieval Europe, nobles needed land, merchants needed routes, churches needed authority, kings needed legitimacy. In modern systems, corporations need contracts, politicians need security narratives, bureaucracies need budgets. Financial systems need predictable spending. Peace threatens revenue. And when peace threatens revenue, it becomes fragile. This is why wars often restart before they fully end. Not because people want violence, but because systems are built around it. The Crusades taught Europe how to make war sustainable, and sustainability is far more dangerous than brutality. 3 clear takeaways. Takeaway number 1. The Crusades created infrastructure, not just conflict. They built financial, logistical, and institutional systems that outlived the wars themselves. Takeaway number 2. Ideology is often the cover, not the cause. Religion mobilized people, but economics kept the system running. Takeaway number 3. War economies don't collapse on their own. They adapt, rebrand, and migrate unless deliberately dismantled. The Crusades ended centuries ago, but the idea that war can be managed, financed, and justified as a permanent feature of society never did. If a medieval holy war could reshape Europe's economy for generations, what systems are today's wars quietly building for the future? And will we recognize them before they no longer need our belief to survive? If this changed how you see history and modern conflict, like the video, subscribe for deep dive historical economics, and share this with someone who still thinks wars are only fought for ideals. Because understanding how war becomes business is the first step toward questioning whether it has to be.